star?
I don't know. I think it's just a continuation of years of conversations now.
Okay. Well, there is some catching up to do.
Yes.
You know, you now have a new organization, I think, since I last saw you.
Yeah.
You know, have you considered your association with the Dream Defenders? And tell me something about the new organization you are involved with and what?
Yeah, I'm always gonna be a Dream Defender. So we're working together right now on a project to potentially have Dream Defenders be a part of a national formation. You know, we've only been Florida.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out what a national formation for Dream Defenders looks like. So I'm a part of that. But I started an organization called Black Men Build last year. And the goal is the transformation and organizing of black men across the country in service of all black people. And a lot of it is based on like a personal journey that I've been on. You know, you've seen a lot of different iterations of me. But my personal evolution around my masculinity, black manhood, and how that's allowed me to become a better leader, a better person, a more whole person. We want to expose other brothers to that, but also, you know, let them know that we can't really build a movement without them participating in the right way.
Well, drill down into the specifics of that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, right now we're just started, so we have 7 chapters around the country, and hopefully have 9 by the end of the year. Have mass meetings we're on Zoom. You know, we were talking about it, but we're on Zoom every month. We have mass meetings every month where we bring brothers together, circles where brothers are able to talk about what's going on with them in the heart space. We're gonna launch a book club, national book club. We'll be reading together. So it's a bunch of different organizing mechanisms that we're using, but really the goal is how do we have a mass organization of brothers ready to participate in the movement at a full level. So I tried to take a break, you know, and I took a little detour and did something else, but I came back to organizing, and I think organizing is really one of the only things that gives me the sanity and makes me feel purposeful. Real quick, because we were talking about age before, and you don't know this because I didn't know this, but today I searched you, and I had done it before, but I just realized that your birthday is June 23rd.
Yes.
Mine is June 22nd. So this whole time we've known each other, our birthdays are very close.
Yes.
Our birthdays are very close. I'm wondering, you've spent so much time going around talking to younger activists, younger organizers. What set you on that journey, on doing that?
Well, there are 2 pieces to it. One is with the eruption, if that's the right word, of protests around the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who murdered Trayvon. We saw groups like yours, Dream Defenders or Alicia's, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, emerge. And simple curiosity, there's a whole new set of young activists that we didn't know any of y'all.
Yeah.
And so the question, which was a question of curiosity as much as it was political, well, who are they? What do they need? They feel like us, but we don't really know them. So that's one piece of it. And this is unfolding at the same time. Remember, we're organizing the SNCC Legacy Project, which originally was just to recapture movement history, specifically SNCC's, and present it in a usable way for people who wanted to use it. So the attraction to Dream Defenders or Black Lives Matter or BYP 100, any of these groups, was natural on our part. It becomes more formal and political than just curiosity. You may remember we had that first big conference.
I remember.
At Duke.
Yes.
And all y'all came.
I remember Derek was there.
Derek was there. I don't even think Derek was.
No, he wasn't
head of the NAACP.
National. It was just Mississippi.
He was the Mississippi NAACP. But you know, from our point of view, we were all then in our mid to late 60s. All of you all were young people.
I feel old, which is interesting.
But you're 35 now.
I'm 35.
I mean, and I'm 77, so don't even talk to me about feeling old.
What drew you to the movement when you first got involved? It was SNCC, I know.
Yeah, well, it was more before SNCC. And I think this is true for all the people of my generation. We really, in some respects, see ourselves as the Emmett Till generation. When Emmett Till was murdered.
Yeah.
That's what, attracted our attention. I can remember it now, this two-page double truck, as it's called in the media world, photograph of Till's body, and us standing on the corner with the Jet magazine in our hand, talking about this guy who was our age, remember. Till was 14 when he was killed in 1955, and we were roughly on either side of the year 14. And it is what really drew, and I would argue, and have argued, that before Till's murder, we saw struggle for civil rights as something grown-ups did. It didn't hook into us.
Right.
And then that's followed a few years later by the sit-ins, which really, for the first time, were actually able to see people our age engaged in struggle. This is where we first see John Lewis and Diane Nash, and Bird, a lot of names. And they're, again, our age, and it confirms what we were slowly moving toward, that this was something more than grown-ups needed to do. And with the sit-ins, and then moving from the sit-ins under the enormous influence of Ella Baker, moving into community organizing at the grassroots. She's the one who really put that on our plate, which changes us from just protesters around segregation to people who are learning how to dig into communities for political purposes. That's sort of the compact version of my, and we see, I see much the same thing with the movement for Black Lives. Today, I mean, there were specific triggers, Zimmerman, Ferguson, etc. And they're slowly evolving into self-sustaining organizations, and and that again converges with our experience as SNCC people, although there are real differences. I mean, I can tell you anything you want to know about organizing in rural Mississippi. Anything. I know how to do it. I know the people. But if you ask me about the west side of Chicago or South Central Los Angeles, what I can help you with is more limited.
Right. Understood. What's interesting real quick about that, you saying that story, is Emmett Till was such a big part of my childhood as well.
But you're from Chicago, right?
I'm from Chicago. My grandfather actually played at his funeral, played the organ at his funeral. It was a cautionary, I mean, I don't remember, I think it was in Eyes on the Prize as well, but I just remember when I was younger, Emmett Till, that image, my mom still telling me about it, my grandmother, so I couldn't imagine it being something that was happening right when because even 50 years later, or 40 years later, it was still a big, traumatic thing I remember my parents telling me about. And then you come Trayvon, 14 years old as well. And it comes right back around, almost the literal things. It's interesting how these movements start.
And there are always triggers, and what the triggers do is of course, is tap. There's always also a kind of long simmering dissatisfaction.
Yes.
Long simmering of anger, long simmering of frustration, and then something happens, whether it's sit-ins or murders or freedom rides. That I tell people all the time, it wasn't like those of us in SNCC and CORE invented sit-ins. There'd been sit-ins before we were born. Pauli Murray had sit-ins. Even Kenneth Clark of the Brown v. Board of Education decision, the psychologist, he got arrested protesting segregation in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. He and a whole group of students got arrested. So why did the sit-ins catch on in 1960 instead of 1935 when
it was initiated by others.
when Kenneth Clark was doing it, or
Right.
1950, I forget what year, when Pauley Murray was doing it as a Howard Law student, or Doug Moore in Durham, North Carolina. I don't know, but it always catches fire, fueled by long simmering anger and frustration. It goes, I think, all the way back to the days of slavery.
Yes.
And one of my standard, I don't want to say lines, but I when I'm talking to students, as I was last night, I say, you know, enslaved Africans weren't conducting protest marches at the auction blocks.
Right.
And enslaved
Right.
Africans were not having sit-ins at Plantation Manor dining rooms.
Right. Right.
What were they doing? Well, they were figuring out, organizing how to resist their enslavement. They ran away. They had slave revolts.
They poisoned.
They poisoned.
Yes.
Sabotage.
Had some
Work
yeah.
slowdowns.
Yep.
And all that. So this long tradition flares up. It's always flared up for various reasons throughout our entire history here in the United States, and the movement for Black lives and all of this protest around police violence is just the latest flaring up of that, or the creation of the Dream Defenders is a organized way to
How
do
do-
this.
Go ahead.
I'm curious in having said that, and given my background, which you know was SNCC and the Southern movement of the mid-1960s, what you as a leader of a newer movement find or don't find to be useful
Yeah.
in what we did. I'm curious. I'm always curious as to how
Yeah.
your generation understands my generation within the context of political struggle and,
Right.
and resistance to white supremacy.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shooting.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance.
We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, Dave.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
I don't know if I would represent the views of the entire generation.
Well, no,
I know.
nobody
I know.
does.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
But when I say that, I'm not just being humble. I think also I diverge a little bit from where other people might think. I think it's all very useful. I know that there's been a lot of people who have said often about generations before that there's some sort of divide, that what they offered, and if you all had done it right, we wouldn't be where we are today. I've heard all different versions of this amongst very cynical people, but
Well, maybe if
I'm
we
a
had
student.
Twitter.
Yeah, if you had Twitter, you're right. Yeah, you might have been good. Email. But for me, man, I'm a student of history, and I think it's all very, very, very useful and instructive. When I was growing up, my parents and my schools that I went to talked to me. I learned about the Panthers. I learned about NAACP to an extent, the legal victories of the NAACP. I learned about SNCC, right? And as I've grown to know more and then to know you all, I don't know that there's any part of you all experience that I found not useful, right? And in fact, I found that if we are to return to some of the basic tenets of how you all built your organizations, right? The relationships that you all have built that have been sustained for decades, not just in the organization, but with the people you were working with in Mississippi, the infrastructures that you all built, the strategies that you all used. I think we might be a little bit farther than we are right now. You know, I think we've tried to recreate the wheel very, very often when many of the basic tenets of organizing aren't gonna shift. Now the tactics might shift a little bit, but I feel that the generations before us have offered a lot of instruction. I mean that. It's been indispensable, and it's allowed us to make some different decisions than we would. I would say, though, that it seems, if without great study, if you're just looking from a glance, it seems that, you know, even the fight for voting rights is something that we've had a strategic battle between generations with. The importance of electoral victories in the larger goal of revolution, you know, and I think we even saw that. You tell me if I'm off, but I think that was even a fissure within SNCC for a time. You know, and I think the story goes, Ella said, do both. You know, but you know, the importance of voting rights, the importance of integration, right? I think is far less of a goal for us. You know, for me, I have no desire, right, to be a part of this. I know that I'm here. I can't deny that I live in the U.S. I have certain ways that I've been programmed and ways that I have to move in order to live in this society. But to be a part of American society as an equal even is not a desirable goal. And I think that's something that I don't know we've had battles with, right? And one other piece, and you know, I don't know if you know what I'm gonna say, but when I say it, nonviolence, you know, as a strategy.
I get questions about this all the time.
Yes,
you know.
yes, I know you do. You know, so the subject of nonviolence as a strategy, a tactic, a moral imperative or a strategic imperative is something I think, you know, while we don't cast away the learnings of previous generations, it's something that people would love to sit down across from you and talk about.
Yeah, I get asked about that in particular, but also the whole gamut that you just outlined.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's generational, personally.
Okay.
And I would add to your list, black nationalism.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes.
I don't think it's generational. If you go back through certainly the modern era, by which I mean the post-Civil War, post-Reconstruction era. I mean, there have been arguments around these kinds of issues.
Okay.
All along.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think there's a lot of confusion about where we stood on something like nonviolence, where we stood on something like voting. We did have huge, when the idea was first put before us, voter registration. I won't go into the whole long history of how this came, but suffice to say, the Kennedys were pushing.
Yes.
That.
I know a little bit of that story. It was an outside influence.
And the attitude was, well, what are we supposed to do? Be one of Kennedy's people?
Right.
Right. Are we supposed to be Democrats?
Right.
What's the point of that? You know, surely there's something more revolutionary. Surely there's something more radical. Remember, we're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old.
You're on fire.
Yeah, surely we can do, and we were going back and forth on this, and Miss Baker, Ella Baker, who rarely stepped into arguments inside SNCC, made the common sense suggestion because she knew more than we knew. And that was, well, why don't you have two wings of your organization?
Right.
You can have a direct action or protest wing. Diane Nash headed that up. And you can have a voter registration wing. A guy who's passed now, Charlie Jones, headed that up. What she knew that we didn't know was to go into places like Mississippi or Alabama or
Protest.
Georgia,
Yeah.
talking about voter registration in these little bitty towns and in these raw Ku Klux Klan infested towns and counties was the same thing as having a sit-in.
Right.
In fact,
Right.
in very few of these towns actually had places to sit in.
Right.
unless
Let
you-
alone, yeah, we're doing it.
So she knew that, and we learned it very quickly. That if you're in some place like Amite County, Mississippi, perhaps the most Ku Klux Klan ridden county in the state of Mississippi, and you bring some black farmer down to the county courthouse to try and register to vote,
That's tantamount to.
that's tantamount as walking into a white restaurant or cafe
Yes.
and asking for service. So it didn't take very long
Right.
for SNCC's workers to see that, and that eliminates the argument really over direct action or protest versus voter registration. That's how that happened. Nonviolence, nobody really much in SNCC was committed to nonviolence as a way of life, with the one exceptions would be the Nashville group. This is John Lewis,
okay.
this is Diane
Diane
Nash,
yeah.
Bernard Lafayette, but these people had been mentored.
By Dr. King.
No, they were mentored by James Lawson, a minister, and he had gone to India as a Methodist minister to study Gandhi, and he brought that back as an instructor at Fisk University in Nashville, and that whole group of students who sat in 1960 in Nashville, which includes John and Diane, were philosophically committed to nonviolence. The rest of us, I was at Howard, other people were at wherever, Grambling. No, what we saw was it worked. You could challenge white people in these restaurants, and you won sympathy for your challenge. That's how we saw it. It was a tactic that at least temporarily seemed to work, and that's why the Freedom Rides too.
Right.
But it was not a philosophical commitment. For instance, Stokely was never philosophically committed.
I didn't think he was.
And the organization was comfortable having those two points of view
Right.
within it. And then the question of nonviolence never came up in the rural South.
Okay.
In the rural South, it's about staying alive.
Right, right, right.
That's what that's about, so you can proceed with the work. We never asked people, because one, we didn't have sit-ins in most of the rural South, and nonviolence never came up in the rural South. I mean, people thought of us sometimes as the nonviolence, but that has to do with the influence and impact of Martin Luther King, who was seen and was an advocate of nonviolence. So, but in the rural South, here's how nonviolence came up. You'd be sitting in some front room of somebody's house or something like that. And if there was a neighbor over, they were very proud to have, they would say one of two things. We got a freedom rider staying with us.
Yeah.
Or they would say, we got one of the non-violents here.
The nonviolence.
That was
This is your name.
That's what the name.
Yeah.
And then they would say, somebody might say, and I've had this happen to me, I can think of one house where it really happened.
Yep.
They say, well, Charlie, you may be nonviolent, but I ain't letting one of these white people kill you. And they might be cleaning their rifle, or their Winchester, or their shotgun. So that's how it might have come out. It never came up in real practice, partly because the way whites attacked you was often by ambush. It was different in my grandmother's. My grandmother's from Mississippi. In my grandmother's time, they could run an ad in the newspaper. They would say, we're gonna hang Phil by the oak tree at the fork of the road. Y'all come.
Yo, come one, come all.
And you've seen the photographs,
Yeah.
Whole
Picnic.
families coming down to celebrate the hanging of Phil.
Yeah.
And,
Man. Yeah.
and But after World War II, it wasn't like that, because you had all these black soldiers that had come back.
home, and they were armed.
And they were armed, and they had allegedly been fighting for democracy overseas, and were not inclined to accept the lack of it at home. That's who gave us a great bit of the support. You know, that's who, you know, these World War II veterans, and later on, and Korean War veterans, but especially the World War II veterans, who headed a lot of the local NAACP branches. So the nonviolent thing didn't really exist outside of sit-ins in cities like Atlanta or Nashville or New Orleans, cities where there were restaurants and places like that. Once you're in Sunflower County or Issaquah County or Tallahatchie County, this is just not it's not in the conversation, really. And in fact, and the older people, and they weren't going to ask us for permission to use their rifles
at all, to protect themselves
themselves or us. And we had enough common sense to know that we shouldn't ask them.
And murder was always on the menu. You all saw it. Y'all had friends.
But it's a different kind. It's no longer advertising in the newspaper that we want to hang Phil at the fork of the road. It's secret. It's planting bombs underneath churches or bedrooms. It's assassination.
Working with police.
Working with the police. Medgar Evers was assassinated.
Yes.
Martin Luther King was assassinated.
James
Chaney was handed over to the Ku Klux Klan by the deputy sheriff. Of the county.
In the middle of the night.
So that's a different kind of and the response to that is not nonviolence. Once you've been shot, and from ambush, or has happened here in Florida with Harriet and Harry T. Moore, who had the Klan put a bomb underneath their bedroom. You know, the question then isn't nonviolence. For us, the question was, how do we pressure the federal government to provide protection that local authorities will not provide? And that was a huge problem. Black Lives Today, there was a fuller discussion of what the real dynamic of nonviolence and sit-ins and the like were. It's more complicated, and the political tensions, I mean, after all, Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois were arguing with each other way back at the beginning of the 20th century.
In the papers everywhere.
And neither one of them like Marcus Garvey. So
I want to ask you, because when I think people will see this, and you laid out the context, and I think that's super important, and we don't want to miss that. I think we miss a lot of that memory, that historical memory. And you're only 77, but it's still a historical record that we don't have. I have a question I've always wanted to ask you or someone else, and I never have been able to. It just never came up. You all were losing your friends, and I've lost people that I knew of. Particularly Ferguson has had a lot of people who have been killed, murdered. None of them I was really super close with, except maybe one or two. But you all were losing your friends, the leaders that you looked up to. I don't care about presidents at all, but you were losing heads of state. These are things, attempts were being made, some successful, some not. What was it? What were some of the lows? I felt low when we've lost campaigns, or we fought for something, or we had a moment where you thought like we about to win, and it just poof, vamoose, gone. What were your lows like, you personally?
Well, it wasn't that way.
Okay.
Exactly. It was, we were organizing in these communities. And I tell people all the time, we were not organizing SNCC chapters. We were organizing communities to take control of their own lives. We were
Yes.
not building SNCC chapters. We
Right.
were building local community organizations with local people in charge. And the hard part of doing that is that when you come into these communities, the county or some little town, you quickly realize you've brought danger with you. You know, the white people learn right away that they can't run you out of town. They learn that right away. Okay, we're not going to get Charlie out of here by shooting at him as he's driving down the road in his car. So they turn their attention to the local people you're
Right.
working with.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes those local people we are working with get killed.
Yep.
And that's the hard part, you know, knowing that X, Y, or Z person gets killed because you are there. Or a church gets blown up because you are there. And you've brought this, it's not, there's always danger, but not constant danger. That's the hard part. A friend of mine, I won't name him, who the farmer he was working with got killed, and he went to the funeral, and the farmer's wife walked toward him pointing her finger at him saying, "You killed my husband.
Yeah.
You killed my husband." That's the hard part about because if you're in there as a SNCC field secretary, your eyes are already open to the kind of danger you're exposed to it, and if you can't accept that, then you leave. But once you decide to stay, you've accepted the fact that you're in danger. But it's much harder to accept the murder or something of some sharecropper or day worker or farmer that you're working with. That's harder. And here's where your connections with the community count for a lot, because the community is anxious that you're not blaming yourself. You know, they know how dangerous it can be doing voter registration or something like. They know that, and they don't want you to damage yourself. And here I'm talking about psychologically damage yourself because people around you who are working with you get killed. I don't know how that compares to the kind of experiences groups like Dream Defenders or Black Lives
don't know if they
Matter
can.
experience, you
Yeah.
know, with police violence.
Can I push you a little bit more? Just a little.
Okay.
Because I'm really interested. How have you're 77, you got involved at what age?
As a 18-year-old with the sit-ins.
How have you, there hasn't been all positive, you know, what are those moments like when you say, I don't want to be involved? Have you ever had those moments?
I never had that, no.
Okay.
If I had said I don't want to be involved, I wouldn't have been involved.
Yeah.
I would have stopped whatever it was I was doing. Sometimes I got surprised by I had no intention of staying and working in Mississippi, for instance. I was on the way to a workshop for student activists in Houston, Texas, and CORE that was putting it on and had given me money for a bus ticket to take from Washington, where I was in school at Howard, to Texas, Houston.
Okay.
And I got off the bus in Jackson, Mississippi because the students were sitting in, and I felt it's one thing for me to be engaged in protest and sit-ins in the Washington, D.C. area, because everything around Washington was segregated. But it's something different to be doing this in Mississippi. This is where Emmett Till, that's what was up. I said, this is where Emmett, so who are these students to be doing that in this place? So I got off and made my way to their headquarters, and I met some of them, and one of them, people I met, was Lawrence Guillot, who was just coming out of Tougaloo College, and would later become the chair of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And Giat was a big guy, 6 feet, a couple 100 pounds, and he kind of got up and hovered over me, looking at me with complete disdain. And I remember his words exactly after all of these years.
Oh,
he looked at
man.
me and he said, "You're going to Texas for a workshop on civil rights? What's the point of that when you're standing right here in Mississippi?" And
The challenge
I
was
got the
laid
message.
down.
The challenge was there, and they were getting, he and a couple other people, Charles McLaurin, were getting ready to go up to the Delta to begin voter registration campaign, because that's the black belt of Mississippi, the cotton country. And I got in the car with them.
Wow.
I said, well, I don't have to go. I'm thinking, yeah, I don't have to go to this workshop.
Yeah.
I can hang out with these.
I could do it right here.
These
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
I went up with them. But what I didn't realize, and it was summer. I was out of school, so I
Yeah.
didn't have any classes to go to or anything like that. So I was spending the summer with them, right in Sunflower County, in fact. I was with Mrs. Hamer the first time she tried to register to vote.
You were with her?
Yeah.
The first time?
Yeah, at the courthouse, yeah. There was a whole, we had brought 18 people down to register to vote. Mrs. Hamer was one of them.
Wow.
And
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland. Hey, Black, I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
so at the end of the summer, what I realized, and I hadn't realized this at the beginning of the summer, at the end of the summer, I realized, I said, well, I can't just say, well, folks, it's been interesting.
Right.
But I got to register for classes.
Right. I got to go back to, this is a great adventure.
Yeah, I'm not made up that way.
Right.
So I realized after having involved all these people trying to get, I had to stay, because that was their biggest fear, you know, that you'd start what they call mess.
Yeah, and then go back, and they
then
had to deal with it.
Yeah, because you could do it. They couldn't. Mrs. Hamer couldn't have gone to Washington, D.C. Or any of the other people we were working with. So that was their big fear. So in order to sustain what you had begun, you actually had to stay.
Yes.
And continue. And that was and for me, that's how I wound up staying in Mississippi. There was no master plan involved in this. I used to tell Giat and some of the other people, Dory Ladner, who was in that room, I said, y'all kidnapped me, you know?
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it raises, which is what I want to raise with you. I mean, part of that dynamic has to do with how we had bonded with the communities we were in terms of the work. I mean, the work was thoroughly integrated into the day-to-day life of black communities, which also involved going to church with them or going to the juke. Both, you know, sitting on the front porch. I think the first time I ever watched soap operas was with a group of ladies in somebody's house in Louisville, Mississippi.
The stories. That's my grandma used to talk about her stories.
Yeah, so the way we were bonded with and integrated with the community radically affected the choices we made about work, simple things or not so simple things like staying,
Yeah.
how we moved and whatnot. And I'm curious because I don't hear it from today's movement.
Yeah, you're right.
How they see themselves and how they have been bonding themselves in a similar kind of way, say in Chicago or South Central, and I assume it would be different than what we had to do in Issaquah County, Mississippi, or Floyd County, or Lowndes County, Alabama. And I'm curious about that piece of the movement.
Well, I think that's one of the places where we're lacking. And all of us, I include myself in that number. Now, what we're doing with Black Men Build now is a lot of that is building on some of my learnings and some of the critiques I have of myself and other people and other things I've been a part of or witnessed. But the level of depth that most organizations, I say most, not all, most organizations today have in the daily lives of people and communities is surface level at best. Now, the Black community is different now.
Yeah.
It's just, I think no matter where you go, I'm sure there are parts of rural Mississippi and, rural Georgia, rural Florida that maybe look pretty much the same, but the dynamics of community, the concentration of Black people in some places is just way different. But even still, to be able to adapt to, even if we were to adapt to this level of community, I say we're far lacking.
Why is that,
depth.
do you think?
I think so many of this iterations, organizers and activists come from college.
But we came off a college campus.
Yeah,
a lot
you came
of
off
us.
of college campuses, didn't finish.
No.
Some of you interrupted your college to do this. It's just different today, and I don't think it's different for the better. I don't think that. I think it's a real critique. I think it's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to grow in scale and power like we should. The unions don't have the relationship with people that they used to have, though they do have some. And most grassroots groups are operating with very small numbers of people who are able to do and dedicate the amount of time that it requires to build those relationships with people. And I think people have said, oh, that's the old way of doing things. And that is what I think most organizations are gonna have to do if we're gonna be viable, is return to that. The level of depth, I don't know if it means sitting on the porch, I don't know if it means the amount of time living in people's homes. You all were living in people's homes. I don't know if that's the same for today. But another thing is the nonprofit structure of most of our organizations now. So much of our structures are developed in a careerist corporate model, which creates a division between your organization and the people you claim to represent, right? And so the kind of people that you bring on is different. The goals that you have for them are different. And I just think a lot of what we're doing now really needs to reclaim a lot of what SNCC was doing. And other organizations that have been powered, Saul Alinsky and the farm workers movement. Those were organizations built on relationships, founded on one-to-one conversations like the one that we're having, understanding of people, and you understand me, etc. So much of what we're doing now is so transactional. How do we, it's...
But do you see this changing in any kind of way?
I mean, it's going to change with what we're doing. I can't speak to everybody else. I know Dream Defenders has been pivoting for years to get to that place where we're building deep relationships with people. I can only speak for what I'm holding right now, and I know a lot of other people are seeing it. They're seeing we're not as strong as we're supposed to be in numbers and in depth because we're not spending the time on organizing basics, 101. Having communications with people, conversations with people rather, spending the time. We're so microwave, man. And look, I'm in the generation. I think I could do a lot of different things and do things differently. So I'm not speaking at it from a high horse, but until myself and others recognize that the power of an organization is in the strength of our relationships with one another, then we're not gonna, we're gonna continue to be, like in the Bible it says, like chaff in the wind. And we'll have big budgets and be able to do really big, flashy things, but house of cards.
hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shootings.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Everybody's not cynical on the moment. I don't think I am either, but if we're realists right now, we're not as strong as we could and should be. And I think it's because we don't spend the time developing the relationships like you all were doing.
Well, I think it's ironic, actually, that the level of violence that we were faced with almost demanded
Yeah.
that you bond. The only way you can survive the kind of violent places that Alabama and Mississippi and North Louisiana were was if you followed the guidance of people older than you who really knew how to, they knew when you were safe and when you were not safe.
Let me say this, you're saying it right, Charlie. You all needed the people in order to survive, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You needed each other in order to survive.
Yes.
So much of the way organizations are built today, we don't need each other to survive. We need a funder. We need, you know, our check is being coming from somebody. You know, you don't need the people in order to survive, personally or organizationally, really. Most of organizations don't even have people. You understand? They're just groups with offices and positions.
Oh, they don't have constituencies.
They don't have constituencies. Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Let alone members. You know, constituencies and members can be different things.
Yeah.
They don't have really either one. So you don't need the level of violence is more covert and definitely not as extreme. And so you don't need the people to survive anymore. You don't need each other to survive anymore. And so that's a big difference. I think once you broke that thing and that dynamic away, you know, you don't need other people in order to survive. Your organizations resemble what a lot of ours are now.
Is such a conversation beginning to unfold among movement activists and movement organizations?
Yes. It's happening. People are building differently. Like I said, I'm not down on the moment. I think a lot of us have realized, I don't know, I caveat things too much, but you know, I don't think everybody is doing it wrong. I think a lot of people are doing great stuff and we don't know about a lot of those people, right? Or maybe I know and we don't talk about those people enough. But this is what I'll say. A number of us have been around now for 9-10 years.
Yes.
You know, and whether we consider us old or young or middle, we've learned a lot from the experiences that we've had. And so I've been able to have these conversations, Tiffany, Rachel, Jonelle, a lot of the people you've been engaged with, we're talking about it now. And the ironic thing is we're returning to those roots, right? It's not a radically different thing. We're using social media, we're using computers and all of that stuff.
This is where I'm envious of you all.
But Zoom, these things, none of these things can replace. There may be temporary stopgaps, but none of these things can replace one-to-one conversations with people.
Yeah, I like that's that's optimistic because yet essential.
You talk about optimism. Where are you most optimistic? What are you seeing that makes you optimistic, whether it's in the movement or just the world? I know you stay in tune.
Well, the short answer is y'all.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, as an older veteran of movement struggle, it's a positive thing that you all are out here in various kinds of ways, and in some respects on a larger scale than we were back in the early 60s and middle 60s. You know, I went to Howard, and during the peak...
I went to Florida A&M. I got to get a Florida A&M shout out here.
Well, you know, during the peak of the sit-ins, you know, most of the Howard University campus was busy pledging fraternities and sororities.
Yes, I fell into that, yeah.
Stokely used to tell the sororities in particular that if they helped picket, they were planning a big party afterward.
Yeah.
And they'd all be welcome. And he used to get people out.
Stokely was an organizer, man.
That way.
Yeah.
But, you know, to me, looking, when I pick up the paper, which is, you know, or and read about, you know, some activity of underway, whether it's against police or something else, I find that positive and encouraging. It's a good sign for the future, even if I can't be certain about what all y'all's plans are. It's a good sign from my vantage point to see how many of you there are compared to how many used to be.
Right.
That, you know, here I'm talking about protests.
Yes.
I'm uncertain about what all of this means in terms of what we were talking about in terms of the organizing. You know, as Cortland used to say, or still says actually, protest is necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
You know, that I don't know after that. That's what I'm trying to look into with this latest writing project I'm doing.
Well, that's why I'll piggyback off of you. That's where I'm optimistic. I see people, and I'm a part of people building organization and talking about the importance of organization. And I think over the next few years, that it's going to be a testament to the protests and the organizing that's happened. And I see people leading different. You know, we didn't get a chance to go fully into it, but, you know, this latest movement, iteration, different voices that weren't put into the forefront before, women, queer, trans voices are now out there at the forefront. And I do think in the next few years, this next generation, and hopefully, you know, I'm somewhere in there, are going to lead differently and build organizations differently. But at the end of the day, they're going to be leading and they're going to be building organization. I think that's what I'm most excited about. And, you know, you're going to be around for 30 more years giving us guidance, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and given what you just said, I mean, do you feel the breath of younger persons on you? I mean, you know, people even you knew as children who are now enrolling in college and
they're on our heels.
Yeah.
And we're behind them. They've lapped us, you know, because they had the opportunity to learn so quickly. You know, we had to read and we had to find information on SNCC, right? Now you have the Legacy Project, but they were able to just scroll on social media, read and learn. And so, yeah, the young people on the way, we can only hope to catch up.
Okay.